Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a discussion video for you. Today we're going to talk about blade steel. This is a really common question. It's one that's been answered a number of times, but it can also be quite overwhelming. And hopefully I want to give you a little more than just a list. It would be easy to say, yeah, look for these 5 steels. They're all pretty decent. Hopefully, especially for someone who's new or even someone who's been around but hasn't really given this a whole lot of thought, hopefully this will give you at least some tools, and maybe even one of the things I want to do is maybe encourage people to get a little more in depth on this, because it's a worthwhile question and something that's fun to think about and talk about. So I want to say this. I did have a little discussion on a Facebook group. Peter Rosenti and I are both part of the same Facebook group, and the discussion was being had about S45VN, which is kind of the new hot steel, which to me is actually a little underwhelming. Anyway, Peter's response was, you know, look, in folding knives, the main thing that matters is edge retention, and so S90V is probably your best bet, which totally makes sense, and I get where he's coming from, but it did kind of get me thinking, you know, do I totally agree with this? Are there other steels that I would prefer over S90V? And, you know, that all of that kind of was bouncing around in my head as I kind of worked through this video. All right, let me next say I've got a little bit of background information to get to. So the first one I want to point out is that there are other considerations. Okay, not every D2 knife is going to be equal. Not every S30V or S35VN knife is going to be exactly the same, and that's because there are other considerations. One being heat treat. So how hard has the steel been made through heat treat? And this is a good heat treat. The other one that's going to matter is edge geometry. You could potentially have, you know, the same steel, heat treated exactly the same, and one performs quite a bit better than another based on what's happening at the edge of the knife. So if we take a look at this cold steel Formax, this happens to be in 20 CV. You can see it right there. So what we care about is, one, how thick is this? If we could measure right behind the secondary bevel there, what's the dimension there? And number two, what angle has this been sharpened at? So is it a really steep angle? Generally speaking, for EDC, we want a pretty sharp angle. Really, for most rolls, I prefer a pretty sharp angle. If you make, you know, you can see if I make this angle wider, it's going to make things a little bit tougher. It's going to be more difficult to chip that. Most modern steels can handle a pretty steep angle, and that's been pretty well demonstrated, I think, by Pete over at Canada Gear and Outdoors. All right, so that background information needs to be sort of thought about and given some consideration. And I always try to mention when I make a review, you know, how thin is this knife behind the edge? How good is it at slicing? Is the geometry set up well? And I can tell you that all the knives that you're looking at right here, they're all set up pretty well. I guess I should quickly run through this because otherwise everyone's going to be asking. So what we have here is the new Ferrum Forge Prolax, cold steel 8010, real steel Akuma, cold steel Formax. Down here we've got the Civivi, I can't remember the name of it, Fulcrum, I think, or something along those lines. Rat Model 1, Spyderco Amalgam, Kaiser Gemini in Micarta, Benchmade Super Freak, and we have the Artisan Cutlery Arroyo. Wow. Sorry about that, guys. There was too many that were all kind of close together in name, but those are the knives on the table, and they have a bunch of different steels. I won't, you know, you can easily kind of Google all of these to see what steels they are. I'll probably mention them as we kind of work our way through anyway, so you'll get to know that. So that's the other piece of background information that I want to get to. There's two more things. One is I'm going to put some links down in the description box below. So if you look down below this video, you'll find links to a couple of really good resources. One is the Knife Steel Nerd's edge retention test article. He did a bunch of tests with a bunch of different steels, and super informative article there. Pete over at Canada Gear and Outdoors has a knife steel tier list where he ranks steels in sort of the top tier, and then I think he ranks them A through D or something like that. That's a great video to watch and to take note of. And then finally, Blade HQ has a really helpful steel overview where they kind of, they take all of the primary components of blade performance. So they take edge retention, corrosion resistance, toughness, and sharpenability, and they graph them all. And that's a really, really helpful chart as well. Okay, so that's those links will all be down below, and I really, really recommend you take a look at those and really go down, find those links and add them to your bookmarks, because they're really, really useful. Finally, the last background item is most decent steels will be fine. Okay, I've named a bunch of different knives here. I would not, none of these knives that we're looking at right now, would I complain about the steel, given the purpose of the knife and the price point and all of those considerations. Are some of these steels going to perform better than others? Absolutely, no question at all about that. However, there's a value consideration and a purpose consideration that needs to be brought up. And I've got to say, you know, edge retention is the one that we most often talk about, and it's certainly important, but I would say a couple of things about that. One, remember that a knife that has really, really high edge retention is probably pretty tough to sharpen. Two, learn to sharpen your knives. I think one of the reasons we talk about edge retention so much is people have this idea that if I buy, you know, something in 20 CV, I'll never have to sharpen it. It's just going to hold an edge forever and ever and ever. And that is just not the case, right? Every knife is going to need to be sharpened. And in fact, those 20 CV or M4 knives are, yes, they're going to hold an edge for a long time. That's great. But when you do have to sharpen them, it could be pretty tough. Okay. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. Finally, I feel like edge retention is one of those things that's kind of like off-road capability in a car or truck, right? We all love the SUVs that say they can just drive over anything. You know, you drop this thing into four-wheel drive and you could drive up the front wall of your house, over the roof and off the back, and you wouldn't have any problems whatsoever. And well, we all like the idea that our car can do all kinds of ridiculous stuff. The fact is, we never need that, right? Every once in a while, we're going to have to cross a train track, and that's probably the most off-road that most of us are going to get with our vehicles, all right? And the same is true of edge retention. Most of us don't need 20 CV. And I made this kind of joke before, and I think Pete picked up on it and shared it on his channel as well. But the fact is, if some kind of knife genie snuck into my room and changed all my knives to HCR 13 MOV overnight, it would probably take me a month or two to notice. You know, I might be eventually like, hey, feels like this knife is not holding an edge. Or the next time I go to sharpen, I'd be like, why is this so easy to sharpen? But it would take me a while. The fact is, most of us don't need the kind of performance that most steels today can deliver. So finally, let's go ahead and get into the list. I know we're 7 minutes in, but I feel like all that background stuff was important to get to. And frankly, it doesn't take long to just list a bunch of steels. So we won't, you know, this is not going to be a super, super long video. The first thing I want to say is when it comes to the best knife steels, what we're looking for is that balance of edge retention, corrosion resistance, toughness, and sharpenability, right? And in my discussion with, you know, you may recall the discussion with Peter Rizzenti that he said, no, let's max out edge retention. And I get that, and I see the appeal to it, but I'm not sure I totally agree. So let's point out here, and by the way, I definitely, you know, am hesitant to disagree with anybody on knife steel, but certainly a professional knife maker with the reputation of Peter Rizzenti, you know, I'm not, you know, if he says S90V is the best, he's probably right, but I'm going to hold my own opinion anyway, okay? Nothing new here, though, guys. In terms of the best all-around steel, people have been talking about M390/204P/20CV, which are all basically the same steel. And these all do a really good job. They have very good edge retention. They have good corrosion resistance. They're all pretty tough and reasonably sharpenable. They're not super easy to sharpen, but okay, those steels have the reputation they do for a reason. And again, we're assuming a good heat treatment and a good edge geometry in all of these cases. Now, if you want to max out that edge retention, yeah, there are some steels that will really go nuts. Maximet, S90V, S110V, ZDP 189, M4, Rex 121, even LMAX, although it's probably the lower end of that list, is known to have pretty darn good edge retention. Okay, so those if you want to really emphasize edge retention, those are some of the steels you might want to look at. There's a bunch of other steels here though that are going to be fantastic. Okay, and all those steels I already mentioned are already going to be fantastic, although some of them are going to be pretty hard to sharpen and maybe a little chippy if you're not careful. Now, assuming again that we're talking about folding knives, a steel that's a little bit chippy probably isn't a big deal because we're not pounding these things through car doors. We're just going to be very, gently cutting a bunch of, we're pretty much going to be doing like pushing through material, which is not, you're not going to be adding a lot of this kind of stuff to your knife. And so a steel that's a little bit chippy is probably okay. Now, to get a little more toughness, you might want to look at 3V, 4V, crew wear. S35VN, they talk about that being a little tougher than S30V, and I'm sure it is, but S30V can be a little bit chippy as well. S45VN is, apparently the goal they were going for is, better similar toughness to S35, but maybe a little bit more edge retention. And I don't know, that steel, having looked at all this stuff that, I've looked at the data that people are coming up with, it doesn't look all that different, right? It's not like S45VN is going to take the place of M390 and 204P. That doesn't seem to be the data that people are coming up with. Other great steels, CTS XHP. This is one of my favorites. I guess I'm letting the cat out of the bag. I was going to save my favorites till the end, but now you know at least one of them. CPM 154, great steel. AEBL, RWL 34, again, good steels that you're going to get really good performance. And you're going to see those on some higher end knives as well. One that I think needs special mention is LC200N. And the reason that's a great steel, by the way, I should have mentioned, so, just as I'm working through here, so we got S30V, S35VN, D2, we haven't gotten to D2 yet. This one is going to be Nitro V, M4, I think we already mentioned the M4. This one's 20CV, which is similar to M390 and 204P. I don't have anything in CTS XHP, even though that is about my favorite steel. My American Lawman is not with me today. Cold steels used to all be CTS XHP, and I'm sad that that's no longer the case. All right, but from all of those steels, I don't think I've forgotten to mention any. I'm sure I've forgotten to mention some, in fact. But you're going to get excellent performance, okay? Just really, really good steels. Most of those knife steels that I've just been naming, you're going to pay a little bit more. Okay, you're going to probably be looking above $100, maybe 150 to 250 type of ballpark. All right. And I'm oversimplifying this for sure. So when we move into sort of more budget steels, there's still lots of great steels. All right, D2 is fantastic. Now it's not super corrosion resistant, okay, so it can rust on you, but I've rarely had a problem with my D2 steel giving me any kind of problems. What is this guy? N690. So N690 is pretty nice. Again, it's a more budget steel. The one thing I will say, do I have anything in VG10? I guess I don't. N690 kind of reminds me, or is very similar, in fact, to VG10 in terms of performance. What I often find about N690 and VG10 is their performance is not amazing, but they're often put on fairly expensive knives, especially European companies love to do this. And I'm like, yeah, they're not, if you're paying, I don't know, $150 to $250, you don't want N690 or VG10. Other steels that kind of fall into this mid-range category, but can be that are good performing steels, but don't cost a lot. 14C28N, AUS10 is, both of those are great. 9CR18 MOV, again, really, really good. Available on a lot of Civivi knives. I wish it was more widely used. Same is true of AUS10 and 14C28N. When we move down sort of a tier, the lower end, but still fine, okay, still acceptable. Steels like this one. This is, I'm not sure, it's so small you probably won't be able to see it, but this is HCR14 MOV. So it's going to be okay, but it's not going to be anything to write home about. Another knife I'll throw in here, this is the Artisan Arroyo. It has a proprietary steel. You can see the name right there, AR RPM 9, and they're reporting performance similar to 9CR18 MOV and 14C28N. So that puts that in a pretty nice place in terms of budget steels. Now, out of all of those steels, are there some that stand out to me that I tend to like more than others? Absolutely. Now, let me be clear about this. I don't take huge points away for not being in the steel that I like the most. Okay, so when I'm doing a knife review, I'm not like, well, this could have been in this steel, so because of that, I'm not happy. But I may mention it, especially if there's a big price discrepancy. So my favorite steels are going to be the 20CV M390 204P group. That's a great steel, really, really well balanced. Okay, another favorite of mine is, and this is probably my top two steel. In my top two, CTS XHP is a great steel. Now, this is going to be in S35VN, but cold steels, as I was saying, used to all be in CTS XHP, and the performance on that was very, very impressive. I have to say that on those cold steels, I found that they held an edge like crazy, but they were not that difficult to sharpen. S35VN, it's not that difficult to sharpen either, but it doesn't hold an edge like the CTS XHP did. And really, it doesn't have a reputation for being any tougher than CTS XHP. So yeah, I definitely like the XHP better. S35VN is one of my favorite steels, though it is a nice, well-balanced steel, fairly affordable, available on lots of different knives that you don't have to break the bank to get. And then my budget steels, my favorites are going to be 14C28N, 9CR18 MOV, and honorable mention to AUS 10. 14C28N is where I want to emphasize just a little bit. I have seen really impressive results from that. I have had a couple of knives in 14C28N that I just couldn't get over how well they performed, how tough they were, how well they held an edge, how well they stood up over time, even compared to knives in better steels, where I'd be like, man, this steel has kind of lost its really good edge, but that 14C28N is still holding up. That used to be exclusively a Kershaw steel. Now you see it a lot from Reich knives, from Real Steel knives. This knife in K110, which is sort of a D2-like steel, I kind of wish it was 14C28N, but it's not. It's okay that it isn't. It's not the end of the world, but 14C28N is a real favorite of mine. So there you go, guys. I hope that helps. I hope that gives you a little bit of information. And more importantly, I hope that you check out those links down below, because that'll give you a lot of information. But I purposely avoided articles, other than the Knife Steel Nerds, it's a little in-depth, but I tried to avoid articles that would be like ridiculous and not very helpful. But that nice summary from Pete over at Cedar Canada, that's really helpful. The summary from Blade HQ is really helpful. And if you're going to spend a little more time, the article from Knife Nerds is definitely worth a read. There you go, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. I'd love to hear your comments down below about what you like the best. Don't forget to check those channel sponsors. It does help me out a whole lot, whether it's DLT Trading using my affiliate link. That helps a lot. Now, I don't get a discount code there. Sorry about that. That's not the way they do it over there. But you do get a discount if you go to White Mountain Knives or Southern Edge Knife Works. So there you go, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll talk to you soon.